This talk was presented at Google I/O Extended Grand Rapids in 2023.
I'm here to present the velocity trap. And this is something that I've observed in organizations through the years as an agile coach. But I have done a little bit of everything. So if you don't know me, if you didn't look at the schedule, if you weren't listening, I am Brad Nelson. I work for a company called Insight Enterprises, and we are a consultancy. I've worked at many Fortune 500 companies. I'm from here originally, so born and raised in Grand Rapids. I worked at Meyer for quite a few years. You'll hear some examples there, although I try to keep the examples low because I know we're tight in time. But used to work for Mitch in the back. He was my boss when I was at Meyer. I've done my tour like everyone here at the other family-owned Fortune 500 companies. So I've been around a little bit, and then I moved to Columbus. I know Ohio, don't hate me, but there's more tech opportunities there, to be honest. And I made a picture. I drew that, so I do art on the side. So yes, I drew that. And I host a podcast, the Agile for Agilists podcast. You would have noticed my stickers on the table. I also have pins. I don't know why I didn't send them out, but if you want a pin. So yeah, I started that this year, and it's been a blast. I also have way too many certifications. Anyway, moving on. So I want to start this talk with a quote from Lord Kelvin, the guy who invented the Kelvin units. And it's to measure is to know. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. I want us to kind of keep this in our mind throughout this talk. This quote actually is not true. I also like to start all my talks with untrue quotes. As Mr. Deming, Dr. Deming, proved, you can improve without measuring. It can be done, but how do you know? Right? How do you know that you're improving if you're not measuring it? So I like to think of metrics as a flashlight in the dark. They can only show you what you point them at. For my presentation, it's a lantern because I thought it looked cooler. So whether you're using lanterns or metrics, right, we need to use them appropriately. They're a tool, and they only show us what we point them at. For the sake of this presentation, we're going to talk about two groupings of metrics, outputs and outcomes. And so an output tends to be more common. It was definitely more common back in the day. I build more of something and people will buy. I have a picture of a grocery store here. That is not a picture of Meyer. But the idea is if I fill the shelf, people will buy it. Well, that is less applicable today when there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of options, and the things that we do in software aren't physical. Right? So what we want to look at outcomes, which are the results of our outputs. What is the reason for building the thing? We'll talk about that more. So first rule of business. Why are businesses in business? Anyone? Money. Dollar bills. I only had a royalty picture of Canadian money, so sorry. But yeah, that's our first thought, right? We're here to make money. But the reality is that businesses don't start because they wanted to make money. And I don't buy from a company because I want them to have my money. And I don't work for a company because I want them to make more money, right? Companies start because they're trying to solve something, whether it's a want or a need. And they need to make money to continue to do that. And we buy from them because they fulfill a want or a need of ours. And so if anyone saw Carlos's presentation this morning, he shared one of my favorite principles in Agile about iterative delivery of valuable software. Value is the key there. And it's valuable software to our customers. Right? We tend to just look at that as an iterative point from the iterative standpoint, but really it's about the value. And so when we talk about value, we need to equate it to demand. Right? So companies are in the business of fulfilling wants and needs, and value equals demand. To further emphasize this, I have a quote, because everything is more true when you have a quote. It's this Consumption is the sole end and purpose of all production, and the interests of the producer ought to be attended to only so far as it may be necessary for promoting that of the consumer. Sounds like kind of an old-timey hippie ideal. Does anyone know who actually said this quote? Caesar? No, that's all right. I've given this probably a dozen times, and only one time someone got it. It was the father of capitalism. So the father of capitalism said that companies shouldn't be making too much money, right? That's not their goal. That's not their focus. So let's talk about this company. Everyone here's heard about this company, right? Don't throw stuff at me. We're at a Google thing. Amazon is a company that is known for their attention to their customers with 2-day shipping. If any of you have been following Amazon for a minute, you'll remember a time when people said they can't keep doing free shipping. Right? Like they're going to run themselves into the ground. They're spending more money than they're making. They're never going to last. Well, they've lasted. Does anyone have a guess on how much money they spend on shipping every year? 200 billion? 20 billion? So in 2021, they spent 76 billion on shipping, and their operational income was 25 billion. So they spent 3 times more on shipping than they made. However, 2021, it's a little dated metric wise, but I don't know if they released their 22 yet. They had 56.7% of all sales online were from Amazon. So it's obviously working for them. Another companies I would talk about are the big 3. I don't usually give this in Michigan, so a lot of times people don't know who the big 3 are, but I'm guessing everyone recognizes that skyline here. So Ford, GM, and now Fiat Chrysler. In the 60s, GM had 50% of the car market in the US. 50% of all cars sold in the US were made by GM. As of, I want to say 2022, it was down to 17%. And the reason is that GM and Ford and Chrysler at the time, they knew that cars were a luxury item. People wanted them to look nice. They had the beautiful fins, the great paint job, and that was enough to get people to buy it. And it wasn't until foreign competitors from like Japan and Germany started to send cars here that both looked good and had higher quality that they struggled. Plus some government regulations and so on and so forth. And we've all heard, especially local to Michigan, we've all heard the stories of the bailout and the struggles that they've had since. So they knew their customers early on, but they forgot to keep measuring them and keep up with the market. And I promise my last example, and also please don't cringe. I know we've all heard the stories of Blockbuster and Toys R Us and all those stories probably ad nauseum. But Kodak, one thing I didn't know until a couple years ago is that Kodak actually invented the first digital camera. However, their board members said, we're in the business of film. Why would we sell a digital camera? We're competing with ourselves. So we're just going to patent this, put it in our backlog, and we're going to continue to sell film. A few years later, Nikon released the first digital camera using their patent. So they definitely had customers at heart at the beginning. If anyone knows the story of Kodak, they were the first camera for consumer use. Their whole goal is to make these expensive equipment available to everyone. The owner's dead now, and their board kind of lost that way and lost that vision. So we're talking about what to build. How do we decide? How do we decide what we should be building, especially in software, right, where it's not physical? And if it's going to load, it's known as the innovation sweet spot. So when we look at something we want to look at first and foremost, is it desirable? Is it something that someone is going to want? We tend to think, how is this going to make me money first, especially big corporations? But first, we need to ask, is this something that people want? Then, is it feasible? Is it easy for us to build? Maybe easy is not the right word. Is it reasonable for us to build? We can build anything, right? It's just how long is it going to take? How difficult is it going to be? So can we build it in a reasonable amount of time? And then the viability is the cost component of it, not just how expensive will it be, but is this actually going to benefit our company? So we have to make money to stay in business. And so when we look at our current metrics that we use, I want to ask all of you if they help us with the innovation sweet spot, right? Do they align to the innovation sweet spot? And so after the name of this presentation, the velocity trap, right? We look at velocity, Carlos spoke about this morning, right? Does velocity help us know whether it's desirable, feasible, or viable? Any? Not really, no. What about a burn down chart? If it's on time, on budget, probably guess the next one, in scope. How about code coverage? I mean, all these metrics that we get asked to provide to people in our companies every day, they don't actually say whether or not we should be building the thing we're building. They're outputs, and they can be valuable in the right instance, but they're not the first thing we should be measuring. They're not the first question that we should be asking. So most companies tend to think like this. But most customers are not that way. So how do we know what our customers want? How do we know what fits within that desirability thing? And the first thing is you are not the user. Right? And it's known as the false consensus effect. And it doesn't matter how much you use the product. If you are part of building it, you will never be the user. You have context that your users won't have. You care more. And a perfect example of that is Meijer. Everyone that works at Meijer shops at Meijer, all the way up to the CEO. And sometimes, and I worked in the loyalty department, I didn't mention that. I worked on the mobile app, e-com site, so customer-facing area, and a few of you here I worked with, so you know that, but the rest don't. And it wasn't uncommon for the C-suite, or right under them, to make requests. I'm a user, I shop at Meijer, this is what I want. It's like, okay, yeah, you do. However, most Meijer customers don't make C-suite money. Most Meijer customers aren't going to buy the Meijer brand because they know it's better for Meijer if they do. And they think differently. And so while they have valid points, they're not the user. To Meijer's credit, they didn't stop there. They actually spoke to users in the store. But so how we figure out what our users want is we actually really creepily stare at them from a mile away with binoculars. Hold up a little more. All right. So we do observe them. Hopefully not super creepy like, although that was something I would say at Meijer is Meijer knows way more about you than it would probably make you comfortable. And so that was something that we really worked on was how do we take advantage of that without creeping you out? Right. The thing is, if you ask somebody what they want, they could tell you anything, and it's not actually factual. That's not a good way to figure out what people want. You have to observe them. What are they doing? How are they using your things? The only time that you can really ask someone is if it's something that you can't infer from observation. Right? Why did you come in today? Why did you visit my site today? Why did you load up this tool today? What is it that you do for a living? How many people in your household? Anything that you can't infer just through observation, you can ask. So suspend disbelief. I'm watching my customers, and I've delivered this working search bar here. Going back to our on time, on budget, and scope, is this valuable? Don't know yet, right? All right. So if people use it, we're going to measure usage, right? So people are using it now. Now it must be valuable, right? Tons of people are using our search bar. In fact, they're using it over and over and over again. It must be super valuable. But they're not finding what they're looking for. So we have to be really careful with what we observe and how we observe and the things that we're observing. And then we start to group our observations together. Unless you work in the fashion industry, they're probably not all dressing the same. But there will be similarities in a way that you can group people together. And then I like to use something called impact mapping. And if you worked at Amway ever, they do this a lot. However, I changed it a little bit. I moved it around. So you can go to impactmapping.org. It's free. They'll give you examples of how to use it. This was made in Photoshop. There's not like a great tool for it yet, other than like Visio or Draw or anything like that. But I move things around because I want us thinking of desirability first. So who is our actor? Who is the person that we're building something for? And then what is their goal or their pain? These examples are Meyer-esque, right? They don't want to miss out on a good deal. And how would I measure that? Well, maybe I sell more discounted items. And then we get to how am I going to deliver that? One thing we actually did, or I was a part of at Meyer, was push notifications. And then you break that down into stories. So everything should be traceable back to who it is we're doing something for. Another huge problem at most grocery stores, most retail stores, is the line. People don't want to wait in line. That's a huge problem at Meyer for sure. So what are some ways that we can reduce the line? Well, e-com site, pickup, delivery, all that stuff. But in the words of the wise Marty Kagan, it typically takes several iterations to get our implementation to the point of it delivering value. And so if I were to reword this, I would say the work isn't done once it reaches production, right? Production is part of our refinement process. We release, we see the impact, we see, are we having the desired results, and we adjust. This is something that a lot of companies tend to forget. They just rush something out and then they never look at it again. Or if they look at it, they don't do anything. And so we're going to leverage something called the cone of uncertainty. And so you'll notice all the way at the left is when we know the least. I don't know anything about our customers. I don't know anything about our solution. And as we refine, as we get more quality, we move more towards certainty. But even when we're in production, we're not truly certain if we've had the desired results. And so if you're a part of refinement at all, as a developer, as a BA, product owner, any of that, you have to figure out what the thresholds are for you and your comfort level with this. How much do you need to know as you move through here? But you need to be measuring in production and then iterating through. All right. And this is the agile of it, or lean was mentioned earlier. My background is in lean, so I love lean. And so this is from lean, plan, do, check, act. And the idea is we plan as little as we need to see if we move the needle in the direction we want. We do that little component, we check to see if we've had the desired result, and then we adjust. It's the scientific method. So really what I'm asking you to use is science. Science to figure out, are we building the right thing? And if you're not an agilist and wheels aren't your thing, a decision tree might look like this. We develop and release a feature, and we ask ourselves, was the value realized? If yes, we're done. We stop, we pop the champagne, we throw a party, we're good to go. We don't need to keep building if we've already realized the thing that we were going towards. If not, though, we need to ask ourselves, is there more worth doing? Don't just keep working on it because you've already invested in it. Ask yourself, do we have other ideas? If so, iterate. If not, fail fast. And so life is a maze. There's no direct answer. And this is the problem with outcomes, is that every company is different. Every customer is different. Every solution is different. And so it's just a maze. There's no answer. There's plenty of self-help books out there. There's plenty of value books out there. But really it comes down to doing the work of observing your customers and iterating through what you're delivering. So the second question, where is value realized? Anyone? In your pocket?
Time or money?
What was that?
Time or money?
Time or money? It is in production, in our users' hands. Our users' hand is money. If it's not in their hands, it's not worth anything. Or bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, some might say. So we don't know if it's truly valuable unless people are using it. It's in their hands. If it's just sitting on a shelf, it's going stale. It's actually negative investment. Okay. Code does go stale. I think most of us here know that. Okay. Got a picture of bird in the hand just to prove my point. So I'm going to try to keep this story short, but if you've read The Goal by Goldratt, or if you've read The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim, The Goal came first, and The Phoenix Project is an homage to The Goal. So in lean manufacturing, which is what Goldhart was talking about, he tells the story similar to Gene Kim, where you have, drawing a blank on the names now, it's like Noah and Jonah, I think, are the names. And so the one guy is like, hey, we've optimized our systems. We're able to produce 25% more parts in an hour. And the old wise sage is like, oh, well, are you selling 25% more cars? He's like, I don't know. That's sales. That's not me. It's like, all right, well, did you lay off 25% of your workers? It's like, no, that's crazy. Why would I do that? And the point he's making is that if you're optimizing somewhere in the system, but you're not actually optimizing in production, you're not actually realizing that value. You only have one bottleneck. And so in this case, there may be benefits to it, but at the end of the day, unless it's helping you sell more or it's helping you push more stuff to your users in a coding sense, it's not actually adding value. Or as Jerry Seinfeld would say, you know what's funny when the audience is laughing. If they're not laughing, it's not funny. There's no other measurement for it. So once again, our decision tree, right? Get it in production, is value realized? If not, do we do more? And then the third rule, I won't ask you, but it's, I want you to think, how do you decide what to measure? Well, I've already told you, you measure value. But you get what you measure, right? If you're measuring value, you'll get more value. If you're measuring velocity, you'll get more velocity. It's funny how that works. And so back to my impact map, you'll notice I didn't say, like here where we do push updates, I didn't say how many push updates went out. That'd be an output. Or how many push updates were opened. That doesn't add value. The value I'm trying to realize is I want to sell more items that are on sale. So that's what I'm going to measure. So do we throw away all of our old outputs? I'm sure Carlos would love to smash, right, story points. You could. I am a part of the No Estimates movement. In fact, if you go to my podcast, you'll see our last episode was story points versus no estimates, ironically. But the reality is they're a tool, and all tools need to be used for the right job. You take a hammer to everything, right? We've all heard that saying. And so part of Nicole Forsgren's research, she's identified the 4 key metrics. So these are actually backed by research, and they're in the book Accelerate. They're also known as the DORA metrics, DevOps Research Association. Right? These are outputs. If you use lead time or throughput, that's the story counting that he was talking about this morning. It's called lead time and throughput. Right? How long does it take something to get through my system? Deployment frequency. How often do things get to production, to users? How many times do we push something to production and it doesn't work? Or hopefully it does work. And how long does it take us to fix something that's done in production? These 4 outputs, through research, have been proven to correlate to high performance in teams. So if you're going to use outputs, these are the ones you should be using. After you've figured out your outcomes, what is it that we're measuring for value? So speaking of high performing teams, what are metrics that contribute to poor performance in teams? Well, you may have guessed it by the name of this presentation: velocity, effort, story points. There's no correlation to high performance with it. I also want to point out it's not a part of the Scrum Guide. It's just an extra practice that people tend to adopt. And I will say there is a time and place for velocity. However, it does get abused a lot, which was kind of the point of the talk this morning. From my experience, it's the number one thing that gets abused. We compare it across teams. We use it to compare people's maturity. It is shared outside the team when it really shouldn't be. And it takes extra work. It's one of the hardest things to teach. So why not just use throughput? You can get the same answers from throughput, and it actually correlates to high performance, and it's less effort. Why not use it? It makes more sense. Utilization, how long I spent working on something, doesn't help us. Doesn't correlate to high performance. In fact, it actually hurts, right? Because people feel like they're being watched. But if you work in a consultancy or a staff aug or a boutique shop, it's probably something that you're measured on. I am, actually. The triple constraint, the old PMI favorite: on time, on budget, and scope. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't times where we have to deliver something to a certain time frame. I'm also not saying you should not keep track of your budget. That's an important part of business. What I am saying is that tracking these things does not increase the performance of the team, and they do not ensure that we're delivering value. I can deliver a project on time, on budget, and in scope, and it can add negative value. And I don't know, because I'm not measuring value, I'm just measuring those 3 things. And another is lines of code or merges committed. This is another fun, popular one. I actually considered removing this from my talks. I was like, we're past this, right? And then Elon Musk comes along with Twitter, and what does he do? He measures lines of code. If you are not aware, your most senior people should have the least amount of lines of code and the least amount of merges committed, for multiple reasons. One is that hopefully they're writing simpler, more eloquent code. The other, though, is that I want my senior people helping out other people. I want them helping out the less senior people. I want them a part of our refinement, a part of our planning. They have other things and other ways of adding value than just line after line after line of code. So if that's how you're measuring your team, you're doing the opposite. You're creating the opposite problem. I love this quote from the CEO of Nokia, another company that maybe is cringeworthy at this point, but it's, we didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. There's a lot of speculations on why Nokia floundered. In, I want to say, the early 2000s, they had 50% of all phones were made by Nokia. Definitely dominant market. There's still the memes today, right? The Nokia phone in the cement. They last forever. They had high quality. They were doing things right, and yet Microsoft bought them for pennies. Now, I don't know the exact reason. However, I suspect it's because they were measuring the wrong things. Once again, on time, on budget, in scope. Measure that all day long, which is something I see at many Fortune 500 companies. Doesn't necessarily mean the thing you're delivering is valuable. I have this multi-million-dollar ERP implementation. How valuable is that? I don't know. But I just sunk millions of dollars into it in years and years, and I took the lowest bid from, the giant consultancy that just ran it to the ground and over budget and all this stuff, right? Like, what value did that bring? How do we know? So to recap, I want you to think of value as demand. Value is realized in production. If it's not getting in production, it's not valuable. And remember, you get what you measure. If you're interested in reading more, these are some books that have contributed to this talk over the years. A few of them, like Sooner, Safer, Happier. It's actually Better Value. Sooner, Safer, Happier is the technique that they call it, but the book's shorter. And The Professional Product Owner. Those are two books that I read after I made this presentation, and I was like, crap, people are going to think this is based off those books. They're really good. Inspired is great. Marty Kagan, who I quoted, is in that. And then if you wanted to actually see the research behind the performance metrics, Accelerate is where those are from.